This is a story about breaking a curse. That's how Chapter 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 8, JoJolion ends. A line that sticks with you as you explore the strange world of Moriocho, and as the true identity of protagonist Josuke is slowly revealed over the course of the next 100+ chapters. Hirohiko Araki's beautiful artwork, characters, and themes are utterly enthralling as you read through JoJolion, reading through what breaking a curse really means. In the early 1900s, baseball began to explode in popularity around the United States. The American League had recently been founded to compete against the National League. One of their teams went by the Chicago White Stockings, but the newspapers couldn't fit it, so they just used White Sox instead, and it stuck. In 1909, the Boston Americans jumped on the trend and renamed themselves the Boston Red Sox. This video is a story about breaking 2 curses. But in order to fully understand and appreciate that, we have to go back and look at what a curse really is. November 4th, 1922, Valley of Kings, Egypt. Egyptologist Howard Carter and his team of workers have been out in the desert heat for 3 days now, with little to show for it. Carter's main benefactor, the Earl of Carnarvon, had already suggested that Carter stop searching this particular area for artifacts. The last 7 years of work had yielded little results. But Howard Carter was persistent. The small amount of evidence they had found in the Valley of Kings pointed towards a greater tomb nearby, the tomb of King Tutankhamun. As Carter wept sweat from his brow, a shout came up from a faraway worker. Something had been found. Carter immediately rushed over to see the beginning of a stairway that led to the door to a tomb. Carter had his men reseal the entrance while he sent word to Carnarvon to come to Egypt. Almost 3 weeks later, on the 23rd, they would resume the excavation with the Earl's supervision. Quickly, they were able to confirm one very important detail, that according to the doorway to the tomb, it was in fact the resting place of King Tutankhamun. On November 26th, they would breach the final seal of the tomb, and Howard Carter would step inside and change fate forever. At first I could see nothing, but presently as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues in gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold. The discovery of this tomb would begin a resurgence in the Western world of an obsession with Egyptology. Tut mania had just begun. As the British slowly excavated the tomb, some strange occurrences began to happen. The day of the seal being broken, a worker reported hearing a human-like scream, only to find a cobra in a cage killing a canary. A supposed ominous sign. Carter's close friend, Bruce Ingram, was given a paperweight made out of a mummified hand from the site. His house burned down and then was swept away by a flood after being rebuilt. Then, things took a turn for the worse. On March 19th, 1923, Carnarvon would mysteriously die of an infection to his left cheek. Later on, King Tut's body was exhumed and found to have a lesion on his left cheek. 2 months later, George Gould, a rich American businessman, would also die of a severe fever that he had contracted while visiting the tomb. The public outcry to these deaths caused such a stir that they had to consult one of the world's leading occultists to ask whether or not these deaths were the result of a curse. The occultist, a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes, said that the deaths were not a result of King Tut's spirit, rather, a curse from elementals that guarded his tomb. The curse seemed to calm down in the next few years as his tomb was slowly stripped of all its valuables and Tutankhamun's body was removed. In December of 1927, the crew would finally remove the last artifact from the large annex, where the majority of items were found. 4 months later, Arthur Mace, one of the crew, would die from pneumonia, sparking a new wave of fear. Alfred Lucas, lead chemist, and Harry Burton, their photographer, would also fall ill that same year, impeding the work that could be done. Howard Carter, however, pressed onward. as Carnarvon's permissions to excavate would be gone by the end of 1929. As the end of their job came close, shocking news reached Carter. His own secretary, Richard Bethel, had been killed, smothered to death with no suspect. Howard Carter officially retired in 1932, living out the rest of his life alone, with family and few friends, slowly watching as his life's work dwindled in popularity throughout the culture. Carter continuously dismissed claims of a curse, seeing it as foolish superstition. He would die peacefully in 1939, with just 9 people attending his funeral. The man who first stepped foot into King Tut's tomb was free of the curse at last. The Pharaoh's curse is probably one of the most famous of all time, and it sets the stage perfectly for how we as humans view this idea of curses. Something happened that shouldn't have happened, and now people are being punished for it by nature itself. Regardless of how thin the evidence really is, people latch on to these ideas. Of the 60 or so people that entered the tomb during its long excavation, less than 10 of them died within that decade. Carter, the man who should have had the full brunt of the curse upon him, died over 17 years after he discovered it. Evelyn Hebert, Carnarvon's daughter, who's one of the first 4 people in the tomb, lived until 1980. A long and full life. The most famous curse of all time took 58 years to kill the 4 people it should have killed first. By 1915, both teams had already gotten their World Series win, becoming legitimate top contenders in the early years of baseball. That year, the Boston Red Sox would make another run for the championship. This time, though, they had a new secret weapon. You may have heard of him, Babe Ruth. A star young pitcher who could dazzle with home runs if needed, he would slowly work his way up as a driving factor in the Red Sox success. The Red Sox would go on to win their 3rd World Series in 1915, and it looked like there was no looking back. In 1916, Babe Ruth would prove to be even better at pitching than anyone could have hoped, and would carry his team through yet another great season. This time, however, they would have to outperform the Chicago White Sox, who were being propelled partially because of their star pitcher, a guy named Eddie Knuckles Seacott. The Red Sox would finish with just 2 wins over the White Sox and go on to win their 2nd World Series in a row against the Brooklyn Robins. Not all curses have such prominent storytelling, where the origin and scope of the curse is known. Cursed or haunted locations aren't a new thing. One of the world's most famous haunted houses is in Harrisville, Rhode Island, which rose to notoriety in 1971 when the Perron family began to be tormented by the spirits of the house. The house supposedly had a long history of deaths and Satanist activity up to this point. This example is so famous that the movie The Conjuring was based on their experience, and the attempt by Ed and Lorraine Warren to drive out the spirits. The curse was so bad that the Perron family lived in the house for almost 10 years. Yeah, they mostly just lived with it and tried to stay away from the basement, but nothing serious really happened to them. A cursed location is pretty easy to avoid. You can just move somewhere else. Sometimes, however, the curse transfers from person to person through an object. We've all seen famous internet legends of haunted or cursed paintings. Take The Hands Resist Him, for example, a painting that a seller on eBay in 2000 claimed that the hands in the painting would move around on their own. Or a painting of a girl supposedly named Sony that was spread around and said to cause suicidal tendencies, including that of its creator, a supposed teenage girl from Japan. None of it's true, of course. This picture is actually a character called Princess Rue by the digital artist Robert Chung, titled Melancholic Princess. This starts getting into the absurd world of creepypastas, stories that heavily delve into cursed photos, people, and places. As in the case of Sony, the pictures included in these internet stories are usually randomly selected and have no real relation to the story being told. Many curses are created to sensationalize coincidental events. In the mid-1600s, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier was traveling in India where he came across a large and beautiful gem. Local legend says that it was the right eye of a statue stolen from a Hindu temple, with a curse on it to prevent theft. Regardless of where he actually got it, he had brought the jewel back to Paris by 1668, where it was bought by King Louis XIV. The king would wear the diamond on multiple occasions. 1678 would see the start of multiple health issues for the king, which he would endure until his death at 77 in 1715. His children, however, were not so lucky. Almost all of his heirs died in childhood, and the only one who survived to adulthood died before Louis did. Louis's 5-year-old grandson would instead take the throne after his death, with a counselor essentially ruling the country until he was old enough. Old enough to rule, and old enough to inherit the diamond. Unfortunately, all but one of his 10 children would die in childhood. His eldest son, also Louis, which is not confusing at all, would die before taking the throne, but leave behind his son, again Louis, to ascend in 1774. You may know Louis XVI because he was executed by the French Revolution in 1793, bringing the end of the monarchy. The diamond was stolen during the ransacking of the palace and lost until 1812. During this time, it seems as though parts of the diamond were cut off, likely to make it easier to sell. The blue diamond that once adorned the French king's necklace was gone. A large piece of the diamond was sold by an English jeweler to King George IV of England, sometimes between 1812 and his death in 1830, upon which the diamond was either stolen by his mistress or sold off to pay his enormous debts. By 1839, Hope & Co. had acquired the jewel, dubbing it the Hope Diamond. The stone would change hands multiple times, with owners suffering unlucky fates such as bankruptcy, divorce, and severe health issues. And then it hit a dangerous streak. In 1911, the New York Times itself would publish an article adding to the claim that the diamond was cursed. They claimed Joseph Frankel had sold it in 1907 because of its hoodoo magic. According to them, Jacques Collette purchased the stone from Frankel and then committed suicide. It was then bought by Prince Ivan Kanevitsky, who was killed by Russian revolutionaries. And Miss Ledoux was killed by her lover while wearing the diamond. It was then sold to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The man who sold the diamond to the Sultan was thrown off a precipice with his wife and children. The man who polished the stone for the Sultan was executed, and the man entrusted with watching over the stone for the Sultan was killed by a Turkish mob. And while the article itself didn't claim this, because it was a decade too early, it possibly began the end of the Sultanate of the Ottoman Empire. Abdul Hamid II's rule was filled with crises that would eventually topple the Ottomans, and he was deposed in 1909. Allegedly after that, one of his men was found with the jewel in his possession and hung. The article by the New York Times was published on the sale of the diamond to Ned McLean, whose wife begged him to buy the stone. Ned would go insane and be put into an asylum, with his wife filing for divorce. After her death from pneumonia in 1947, Harry Winston would buy and donate the diamond to the Smithsonian in 1958. And that's where it stays to this day. One of the biggest things to note with a story like this is, what type of person buys the most famous diamond in the world? So many of the people who bought it and went bankrupt or forced to sell it were buying it beyond their financial means to show off for status. It wouldn't be surprising for people in those situations to be divorced either. Or the French nobles. The decadence of their rule was exemplified by their purchasing of such riches, and their failure to provide for the lower class. Similarly to the Sultan and the state of the Ottoman Empire. It's hard to believe that the Hope Diamond was cursed instead of being another symptom of rich people with deeply flawed lifestyles. In 1917, the White Sox would outdo the Red Sox this time. Their star pitcher Eddie Seacott set a record for most quality starts that wouldn't be beaten for almost 50 years. Ironically, he had been traded to them by the Red Sox, launching them into the World Series against the Giants, where they would win their second championship. Babe Ruth had pitched a phenomenal season as well, but the Red Sox needed an X factor if they were to compete with the White Sox next year. At the start of the 1918 season, Babe Ruth officially was added to the batting order even when he wasn't pitching in order to draw in crowds. This would prove to be a good decision as he would hit 300 and lead the league in home runs. He still pitched extremely well, sporting a 13-7 record and a 2.22 ERA, as opposed to Eddie Seacott, who hit a slump due to injuries, having one of the worst seasons of his career. Between the last days of the season and Game 1 and 4 of the World Series, Babe Ruth pitched almost 28 scoreless innings in a row, another feat that wouldn't be broken until 50 years later. This would lead the Red Sox to their third win in just 4 years. The story goes like this. The Hanshin Tigers won the 1985 Japanese Central League pennant. As was tradition for the team, they would parade through downtown Osaka, and each player would find a look-alike in the crowd, who would then be thrown into the river. Upon reaching former MLB player Randy Bass, they were unable to find any lookalikes. But he was MVP, they couldn't skip him. And so, in what would later be seen as an unfortunate decision, the statue of Colonel Sanders from a local KFC would be thrown in the river. Despite winning the Japan Series of 1985, this would begin a stretch of decline for the Tigers, as they would finish towards the bottom of their league for the next 17 years. It became very clear that something had changed that day that they threw the kernel in the water. In 2003, they would again reach the Japan Series. However, the celebration upon winning the pennant would bring the death of a fan, who would join the plunge into the river along with 5,000 other fans. Divers would discover the remains of the statue in 2009 and would subsequently repair its broken pieces over the next few years, returning the statue to KFC Japan's headquarters, since the original location it had been stolen from was closed down. In 2023, the Tigers would finally make another run for the Japan Series, with a cardboard cutout of the Colonel being placed outside their stadium. All curses have a beginning point, a spark that ignites the story. For the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago White Sox, this event was the year 1919. Our two heroes, Eddie and Babe Ruth, would both have outstanding seasons. Babe would break the single-season home run record with 29 homers and lead the league in RBIs and runs, but would only pitch 17 games as their manager believed that the audience was there to watch Babe Ruth hit, not pitch. On the other side, Eddie would lead the league in wins, winning percentage, innings pitched, and threw several complete games. Eddie Cicotte won 29 games for the White Sox in 1919. However, he had been promised a $10,000 bonus if he won 30. And that was because the owner of the White Sox, Charles Comiskey, ordered the manager to bench him for 5 games so that he didn't have to pay the bonus. Meanwhile, Babe Ruth himself was putting pressure on the Red Sox owner for more pay after his breakout seasons, while his manager was being pressured to not let one of the best pitchers in the game pitch so they could bring in a larger crowd. The Red Sox would finish well under the White Sox, and the White Sox would go on to the 1919 World Series, by far the favorite against the first-time Cincinnati Reds. Eddie, upon learning that Comiskey did not intend to pay even a part of the bonus, took his teammate Chick Gandil up on the offer. They would fix the 1919 World Series. The plan was simple. Bookie Sports Sullivan would pay out $10,000 to each player involved in the scheme if they would purposefully lose the World Series without making it too obvious. And that's exactly what they did. Hit batters and missed double plays, the final score was 9-1 Cincinnati. After the game and the players showing their commitment to throw the series, Gandil and the others were surprised to learn they would not be paid yet, despite an initial agreement. Game 2 followed in a similar fashion, with Lefty Williams pitching a 4-2 loss for the White Sox. Gandil would be given $10,000 to split amongst the 9 players who were part of the conspiracy. Game 3 would see the one starting pitcher not in on the fix, Dickie Kerr, pitch a scoreless game, with the White Sox winning 3-0 against Cincinnati. Game 4, Cicotte was up again, and trying not to make things look too obvious, pitched well, until the 5th where he made a very obvious error. Game would end 2-0 Cincinnati. Williams pitched Game 5 and lost it 5-0. Normally this would be the end of the series, however this year they were trying something new, a 9-game World Series to bring attendance up. Game 6, Kerr threw another gem, but his teammates behind him tried their best to continue to throw. A tense 5-4 game won by Chicago. After this, the players still had not been paid off fully yet, and by now, people were starting to change their minds, including Eddie. With the team trying its best now, and Eddie throwing his best pitches, they soared to an easy 4-1 win in Game 7. The series was suddenly close, and that made the bookies very unhappy. Williams, who was set to pitch Game 8, was visited the night before by an associate of Sullivan's and told that if he didn't blow the game in the first inning, his family would be in danger. Williams gave up 4 runs in the first inning, and despite the rest of his team still trying to win, the Cincinnati Reds would win their first World Series 10-5. In the aftermath, the plot was found out, and the players, villainized as the Chicago Black Sox, were banned from baseball forever. 2 months later, the Boston Red Sox would sell Babe Ruth to the competing New York Yankees, reportedly because owner Harry Frazee needed the money and didn't want to give Babe Ruth a raise. On the Yankees, he went on to become arguably the greatest baseball player of all time. In the aftermath of 1919, both teams began to freefall. The Red Sox players were all sold and the White Sox players were all banned, leaving behind for both teams a skeleton crew. Both teams failed to have a winning season for over a decade, until ownership changed. In 1946, it looked like the Red Sox might be first to strike, Going into the World Series for the first time in 28 years against the St. Louis Cardinals, the teams traded games back and forth, leading to a Game 7 in St. Louis. With the score 3-3 and 2 outs, Cardinals' Enos Slaughter is on first base. Harry Walker hits a single into the outfield, which is scooped up by Leon Culberson and thrown to shortstop Johnny Pesky. At that moment, no one really knows what happened. Perhaps it was the curse. Perhaps Pesky was shocked at the speed at which Slaughter was running, or couldn't even comprehend that he would be running home on this play in the first place. Whatever the reason, Pesky hesitated before throwing the ball badly off home plate, allowing the run to score. The Red Sox lost Game 7 4-3. In 1959, the White Sox would win the pennant and go on to the World Series for the first time in 40 years, against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Things looked good, with the White Sox winning the first game 11-0 at Comiskey Park, but they would lose the next 3 out of 4, with the series returning back to Chicago where they hoped to turn it around and win. By the time the bottom of the 4th came around in Game 6, the Dodgers led 8-0. The end score was 9-3, and the Dodgers would win their first World Series in LA. The Red Sox hadn't finished with a winning record since 1958, and yet as if by magic, here they were in Game 7 of the 1967 World Series against none other than the St. Louis Cardinals. Remember that record Eddie Cicotte had for most consecutive quality starts? The only person to ever break that record was Bob Gibson, the starting pitcher for Game 7 for the Cardinals. And he was right in the middle of this streak. Bob Gibson allowed only 2 runs in his complete game. The aptly dubbed impossible dream of the Red Sox was over. The Cardinals had won again, 7-2. In 1986, the Red Sox finished 5.5 games over the Yankees to clinch the division and then beat the Angels in the ALCS, facing them in the Fall Classic with the New York Mets. Going into Game 6, the Red Sox found themselves 1 win away from breaking the curse. With 2 outs and no beyond for the Mets, it looked like the curse was finally lifted. But the batter at the plate hit a single, and then the next batter also hit a single, and suddenly things weren't so certain anymore. A 3rd single in a row, and the game was now within 1 run. A new reliever, Stanley, was put on the mound to try and close out the game, and after going back and forth with the batter, threw a wild pitch that allowed the man on third to advance.
And it's going to go to the backstop. Here comes Mitchell to score the tying run, and Ray Knight is at second base.
The game was now tied, and that was when Stanley threw his 10th pitch, which was hit towards first baseman Bill Buckner, and the most infamous error in the history of baseball occurred.
Little roller up along first, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
The Mets won 6-5. Maybe it was the curse, or maybe it was the fact that Bill Buckner had been hit with a pitch in the 9th inning. Regardless, they would have to win Game 7. As the game began, Boston's starting pitcher Bruce Hurst pitched 5 nearly flawless innings before letting things go in the 6th, allowing 3 runs to tie the game up 3-3. Despite the Red Sox' best effort, they would go on to lose the game 8-5. It was around this time that the curse was given an official title, the Curse of the Bambino. Break the Curse became a rallying cry for the Red Sox faithful. The Boston Red Sox would make the divisional round in 1995 and 1998, but lose to the Cleveland Indians both times. In 1999, they would finally beat the Indians in the ALDS and go on to face the Yankees in the championship. Ever since the trade of Babe Ruth, one team had loomed over the Red Sox fate: the Yankees. Obviously, they were winning more than ever, and it all started back in 1919. But it wasn't just them winning the division, it was how they kept winning. In 1949, the Red Sox were again close to winning the pennant. They were 1 game ahead of the Yankees going into the last 2 days of the season, games that were against the Yankees. All they needed was to win 1 of the 2 and they would be in the World Series. They lost both games. Things would get brutal at times, with fights breaking out between teams frequently from the 60s onwards. By the 1990s, the Yankees fans would routinely taunt the Red Sox players in games, with chants of 1918 or sport Curse of the Bambino merch. Players such as Wade Boggs, who were traded between the 2 teams, were treated with ridicule and in some cases booed or spit on. With all of that as a background, the loss to the Yankees in the 1999 ALCS hit Boston like a truck. While they had lost important games to the Yankees before, this felt different. With the Yankees having won 2 out of the last 3 World Series, the Red Sox losing their last chance at breaking the curse in the 1900s stung that much more. During this time, however, the Red Sox were amassing a team of phenomenal players, and while the Yankees would continue to thwart them, the future was looking brighter. While they would finish second again in the division in 2000, they would miss the wild card spot to the Seattle Mariners. The White Sox, however, would win their division decisively, but be swept by the same Mariners in the ALDS. The Red Sox would finish second again in the AL East to the Yankees in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2005. They would miss the wildcard spot those first 2 years, but make it all the way to the ALCS in 2003. Fueled by star pitcher Pedro Martinez and power hitters Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz, they would come face to face with the New York Yankees. For the first time in history, these two teams would make it to a Game 7 against each other. With the final game at Yankee Stadium, the Red Sox had their ace pitcher, Pedro Martinez, against the Yankees ace, a former Red Sox player, Roger Clemens. With a 5-2 lead going into the 8th inning, Red Sox manager Grady Little kept in Pedro Martinez, who, despite being one of the greatest pitchers of all time, was well over 100 pitches, and starting to tire. He proceeded to give up 3 runs to tie the game. And then, in the bottom of the 11th inning, Tim Wakefield threw a pitch to pinch hitter Aaron Boone to hit a walk-off home run. Game 7 and the Yankees continued to be the Red Sox nightmare. This is a story about breaking a curse. Once again, despite the crushing loss in the ALCS, the Boston Red Sox could not lose hope. They had come so far, and now, after clinching the wild card for the 2nd year in a row, they were on the brink of defeat once again. Throughout the entire history of baseball, no team had ever come back to win a series after being at a 3-0 deficit. In fact, in all of American sports history, only one team had ever come back from such a deficit in a championship series, and that was the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs. For the Boston Red Sox, the odds were insurmountably stacked against them. At Fenway Park on October 17, 2004, it looked as though the curse would rear its ugly head once more. The Yankees were up 4-3 into the bottom of the 9th inning, with Mariano Rivera brought in to close. It's been said that more people have walked on the face of the moon than have gotten a hit off Mariano in the postseason, much less a run. In a rare occurrence, he allowed the leadoff walk, which turned into a stolen second base. A single from Bill Mueller tied the game, bringing it to extra innings. If you ask most people who is the best Red Sox player of all time, you'll hear Ted Williams or Carl Yastrzemski mentioned. But it's hard to think of anyone else more recently deserving than David Ortiz. At the bottom of the 12th inning, with the game still tied 4-4.
Ortiz into deep right field. Back is Sheffield. We'll see you later tonight.
All of a sudden, the energy at Fenway Park changed. Despite being down 3-1 in the series now, anything was possible. Another David Ortiz home run in Game 5 to bring the game close, and suddenly it was in extra innings again, this time going all the way up until the 14th inning. With 2 outs and 2 men on,
Ortiz fights it off center field. Damon running to the plate, and he can keep on running to New York. Game 6 tomorrow night.
In Game 6, despite his torn tendon from Game 1 visibly bleeding through his socks, Curt Schilling pitched 7 innings, allowing only 1 run. None of the management had really realized how bad it had been for him, but this led the Sox to a Game 7. Never before in baseball had a team brought an 0-3 deficit back to it being a tied series, and now they were seemingly about to do the impossible. Only they could overcome their Game 7 curse and the New York Yankees one last time. The game started off with a 2-run blast from Ortiz, and it just never stopped.
Already one one. He swings it, hits that one down the right field line, deep into the corner, sailing, it is gone, it is a grand slam!
Touching me.
Here it is, Reese, the Boston Red Sox won the
Good times never seem so good.
A final score of 10-3 at Fenway Park, and seemingly the world erupted. Despite still having to win the next series, the curse felt like it had been lifted. The Yankees, who for so long had been instrumental in the plight of the Red Sox, have been defeated in the most miraculous of manners.
Yankee Stadium with the biggest comeback in postseason baseball history.
The curse was lifted on October 21st at Yankee Stadium in New York City. Any doubt was destroyed a week later at Fenway Park, as in the 100th World Series, they would easily sweep the St. Louis Cardinals.
Back to full. Red Sox fans have longed to hear it. The Boston Red Sox are world champions.
He's the loosest cannon you ever been around in your life.
You have to talk to be a leader. He wants to try to kill his daddy, go, don't move. He hold that thing. That's why leaders always have to beat the mound off him. They go like this, hey, don't move.
He's the best manager I've had a chance to play for.
But I said that this was a story about breaking two curses. While both teams could point at 1919 as the root of all their problems, it wouldn't be possible for them to end it in the same year. After the Red Sox finally won, the faithful of Chicago began to chant cries of breaking their own curse. If they can do it, so can we. By the All-Star break, the team was 57-29 with the best record in baseball. The Red Sox win in 2004 felt like an underdog story. The 2005 White Sox felt like an inevitable juggernaut. Throughout the entire season, Chicago never once lost its lead over the AL Central.
Oh, this might be right. Way back, way back. Long ball again by Chicago.
But they had one last opponent to get there. Our old friends, the Boston Red Sox. For some of Boston, the idea of a back-to-back World Series didn't seem too far-fetched. Unfortunately, Boston's starting pitcher for Game 1, Matt Clement, would give up 5 runs in the first inning to the White Sox, and things spiraled from there. 14-2 win, into 2 close games, and the White Sox had swept the Red Sox. On the other end of things, the Angels had defeated the Yankees and were on their way to play the White Sox in the ALCS. Things looked hopeful for the Angels, winning Game 1 of the series in Chicago, but this would be the turning point for the White Sox. Some could say it started with future President Barack Obama throwing out the first pitch, but maybe it's better to just focus on the absurd feat the White Sox pitching would perform in the next 4 games. For the first time in over 50 years, a team in the postseason pitched 4 complete games consecutively, reverse sweeping the Angels and going on to the World Series against the Houston Astros. Up to this point, only 18 of the 100 World Series were sweeps. The Red Sox broke their curse with one of them, and the Chicago White Sox, in Game 4, with a 1-0 lead over the Astros, broke things.
1-year rebate with a play, charging it, throwing it, and the White Sox celebrate their first title in 88 years.
White Sox, Chicago's proud of you.
2 teams, cursed in the same year, suffering through over 80 years of hardship, broke their curses in back-to-back seasons. There are things that exist in this world that the eyes cannot see. In baseball, that is the shape of a team's heart. In the aftermath of 1919, just what could you see? It was not despair. To me, it looked like hope. And after everything had ended, the players who kept trying their hardest, that was all for the sake of hope. And in the shining faces of the crowd, the hope of the fans was visible, because at that moment, the curse was broken.